What's going on, everybody? It's your boy Shuggy from Shook Earth Media, and today we are very excited to be talking about Downton Abbey 2, Downton Abbey: A New Era. This is the new film from the classic British television series, a period piece drama that many of us fell in love with around the world, and this is their second time on the big screen. Of course, their first time on the big screen was a triumph. It was a really well done film. So much was packed into that short amount of time. It had an epic kind of story, but it was mostly a lot of fun. But it had the big concept of the king and queen coming to Downton Abbey that drove the story forward. This film feels a lot more like an episode of the TV show, and that is a good thing, and it is also has some cons to it as well. So I did really enjoy this film, and I really think that all Downton Abbey fans need to see it. Everything that you've been waiting to have happen, every shoe that we've wanted to drop, every last thing happens in this film. I don't think there's anything left that I'm like, man, I can't wait for these two characters to get together, because everything that all those things you wanted to have happen they either happen or they're resolved by the end of this film. So this film is definitely about fan service first and foremost, much like the film that came before it. However, like I said, it doesn't have that one big storyline like we had in the previous film that really drove the story forward. In that film, we had, of course, the drama surrounding the king and queen coming to Downton, and all of the king and queen's people coming in to work with the servants and all the conflicts there. There was a lot of different side character storylines really well woven into the story. This film, I would say, does not really achieve that same feat, and I don't even know that it's really trying to. It's a little bit more, I don't know if disjointed is the right word, but it feels a little bit more like television, where you have an A story and a B story, and they don't always necessarily interconnect. So it doesn't have that same cohesiveness, I think, that made the last film so strong. I mean, the last film, we are off to the races right away. We are with that letter. We get a really great cinematic entrance to that film, and we are off to the races, and that's propelling the story forward. There's a lot of interesting things that happen. This film has two kind of big storylines. One is, and I'm not going to spoil anything until we get to a certain point. I'll warn you for spoilers, don't worry. So one of the storylines is, of course, what we see in the trailer, which is Violet, Lady Grantham, is being gifted or bequeathed a French villa from a mysterious man from her past, and there's questions about that. There's a mystery about that, and that's kind of hanging over a lot of the film. But really, that's honestly the lesser storyline. I would call that the B storyline in this episode, and the A storyline in this episode. Notice I'm calling it an episode because it feels more like an episode of TV than a movie. And like I said, there's pros and cons to that. But the bulk of the movie is actually about a storyline that I don't think that was in the trailer or anything. Maybe I just missed it. But the biggest storyline is that a film wants to shoot in Downton Abbey, and this film is being shot as a silent film right as talkies are becoming popular. So it's the new era aspect. That's where the title comes from. It has to do with a movie coming to Downton Abbey, and I must say it felt a bit repetitive, and I can see why they felt like they had to have another storyline in here, because if it was just the movie coming to Downton Abbey, it's much less interesting than having the king and queen come into Downton Abbey. It's just not gonna have that same scale. So we had to have something else going on. But it is a bit unfortunate to me that it doesn't really interweave together in as cohesive a way. And there are a lot of story beats that happen here. Like I said, they're trying to fan service out the wazoo, which is great, don't get me wrong. But I do feel like a lot of these concepts were maybe a bit rushed through. So here's the thing. I feel like a lot of these storylines, they only come off as earned to fans because we've been watching the show for so long. I don't think that this film, in and of itself, the script of the film on its own in isolation, necessarily earns all of the moments, all of the big character moments that happen in this film. Without spoiling what those things are, that's just one of my things, is that it feels maybe a little rushed, but it's not rushed because we've had all these years with these characters, so it's not like it's coming out of nowhere. It just feels like it could have been maybe brought out a little more. And this is especially true with certain characters getting together. The ideas are there, but it does feel a little bit tacked on to this, especially because there's so much happening in this movie that they need to really bring everything together. So I like the new era concept. They've been teasing us with Downton Abbey for years with, oh, Downton Abbey's going to have to downsize. Downton Abbey's going to have to change its ways. The future is upon us, and we are of the past, and we need to make ourselves more modern. We need to change how we operate in order to continue this family and this dynasty. That was kind of the theme of the last film, and we ended on that note. And this film doesn't really do much to progress that other than reiterating what was already said. So maybe that's something that was a little disappointing to me, and especially with the whole talkie film angle, I thought that that was going to be a metaphor for how these older ways of life need to be left behind. Maybe that was the concept when it was conceived at first, but I don't really think that the script itself does a lot to really bring those themes to the forefront. Of course, the strength of this show is its characters, is its dialogue, and its humor, and its wit. All of those things are intact. I will say the first 10 to 15 minutes, maybe 20 minutes of the film is a little slow for me. So the film starts off with Tom Branson and Lucy's wedding, but honestly, like, it didn't even feel like an integral part of the story. It just kind of felt like a way to have the whole cast in an opening scene and a nice scene. That was the one, when we started off with that, I was like, okay, so it's not as densely packed as the last film. The last film was really well focused, and it was off to the races right away. There was not a minute wasted. This movie is not so tightly written. So there's a lot of stuff that you could consider kind of fluff in this. And not that that's necessarily a bad thing, because it's all entertaining. There's no bad storylines here, don't get me wrong. I'm just saying it doesn't have that same sense of urgency that the last one did. So it might not reach the same highs for me personally, but there are some really great emotional payoffs, and we'll talk about that a little more when we get to the spoiler section. But before we get to the spoiler section, I just want to say the things that really distracted me in this movie, and it's about the technical side of things. So if you're not interested in that kind of stuff, you can feel free to skip forward ahead. But the film's cinematography made a lot of strange decisions as far as I'm concerned, and I found it extremely distracting, and I really did not care for the camera work in this film, which is unfortunate because the camera work in the previous film was one of my absolute favorite parts. So the previous film did a great job at bringing Downton Abbey into the cinematic landscape. It was done in a very deliberate fashion, really elaborate camera work, really beautiful shots. Every shot is amazing, incredible camera movements. The film was constantly moving, especially like right at the beginning. We're following that letter through the train station. It had this epic feel to it, really big, grandiose feel to it. This movie does away with most of that. We get a couple nice vistas, and we get a couple other shots that stand out, but for the most part, it's a lot of fairly basic camera work, and there's a lot of this modern editing that drives me kind of nuts, where it's way too many cuts unnecessarily, so they're less deliberate with the camera than they have been in the past. Honestly, I would have preferred if the cinematography in the main show was not necessarily anything to write home about, but it did its job, and it was never distracting. This movie, the cinematography is extremely distracting. most of the shots have a shallow depth of field, meaning that the background is completely out of focus. Everything looks so very off-putting because of how out of focus everything is. And I mean, we like to see blur as cinematographers a lot of the times, but this film, man, it's every shot. So most of the film has the shallow depth of field. It's out of focus. They made a lot of strange choices with the lenses that they used as well. There are a lot of very wide anamorphic lenses that are shoved up in people's faces in close-ups. Most of this film felt like close-ups, which for movie is already kind of distracting to me. Add the shallow depth of field to that. Add these weird anamorphic lenses. It looks like the lenses that they use for like a movie like Apocalypse Now, and it feels very out of place in this very proper setting. And I really kind of prefer that David Lean clean style of look that we got in the previous film. Whereas this, it's more modern and it takes a few more experimental risks that I don't think pay off well. I think the opening shot on this really wide drone, it's a drone shot that's extremely wide fisheye lens. I thought it looked awful. And there's this weird visual effect where we go through a glass window in the church for the wedding, and it instantly ripped me out of the movie. So I was really concerned that we were gonna have a lot of shots like that. Thankfully, they didn't use too many. There's one other drone shot in the movie that I remember. Honestly, like, the cinematography was what bothered me the most about this movie, unfortunately. So yeah, I didn't really care for a lot of the choices they made there, and it's a shame because they had such great aerial cinematography in the previous film. So my personal wish would be that we would have gotten the return of the previous director. I don't know who it is that they hired here, but I'm not a fan of the style, and that's just going to come down to your subjective point of view of what kind of cinematography you like. But I think that even people who don't pay attention to cinematography usually are going to be distracted by it in this film without really understanding necessarily what it is or why. So my final verdict on this film, guys, is that it is a very enjoyable return to the series for fans, and all the actors did an amazing job. Nobody missed a beat. The dialogue is sharp. Everything you'd expect. However, I do think it might actually be one too many, because the previous film was so strong and was so well written that it really was a great bookend for the series. And this film, I think, experiences a bit of a drop in quality, some repetitive storylines, and it really seems afraid to do some of the harder drama stuff. They had two kind of fake outs where something we thought was a conflict ended up not being a conflict, and the only like kind of negative tragic thing that happens is something that was very much telegraphed. So it does feel a little bit neutered, but it is definitely a worthwhile film to watch. However, I don't think it really sets up much more down the line. It really feels like we've done all of the things with Downton Abbey at this point. So I think the previous film was honestly a better ending point for the franchise, but I think that this film might end up having to be that because I don't really see too many more directions to go. I think that's pretty much all I have to say before we get into the spoiler section. So if you guys are going to go see this movie for yourself, definitely come back and see if we agree on the spoiler parts. And I thank you for watching. Definitely hope to hear from you in the comment section down below. But yeah, just breaking right into the spoiler section. So the film ends, of course, with the death of Lady Grantham, Lady Violet. Now, to me, I expected this. It did have an emotional payoff. I really loved the quippiness of the scene and how they let Lady Grantham go out on her own terms. However, I will say story-wise, I liked the idea of the whole villa thing, but the villa storyline kind of fell flat for me. I didn't really think it went anywhere. The point of it was to give this mystery, who this mystery man was, and then there's the tease that we think it might be Robert's actual father, and it's like, whoa, okay, that changes things. that'll definitely inspire some drama down the line. But it was just a red herring, that turns out it wasn't the case. And ultimately, I'm not really sure that the storyline with Lady Grantham, I mean, honestly, where we ended up with Lady Grantham at the end of the last movie is essentially what we get out of her in this movie as well. So, I mean, honestly, they could have started this movie with Lady Grantham already gone. And I mean, she's my favorite character on the show, and I love every scene she's in. Don't get me wrong. I'm just saying that I don't think that it's anything unique to the story that any finishing her arc kind of already happened in the last movie. In the last movie, she realizes that she's going to die soon. She says that Lady Mary is the person that she basically bequeaths her legacy to. That's kind of the emotional beat we end on. That one era is ending and Lady Mary's era is beginning. And this film is kind of a rehash of that. So I will say that it's not as satisfying as it could have been, but I really like how they finished off Lady Grantham's story. Ultimately, I'm glad she's in this movie, but if you're going to see this movie for her, you'll be disappointed to see that she's only in a few scenes at the beginning and a few scenes toward the end. She's not really in much of the middle of the film, and she doesn't go to France. So, I mean, it is a bit limited. Let's jump to another part of the storyline. We got Lady Mary with the director of the movie. And I like Lady Mary taking the role of the being the voice actor for this actress. I really like the storyline with the actress who was a jerk, and then they kind of redeem her by giving her this trouble where she can't adapt to talkies. I like that stuff, but it didn't really tie in with the thematic core that I thought it could have, like I was talking about earlier with the new era of Downton Abbey and what that could be. They didn't really tie those in together. They didn't really finish that storyline as far as I'm concerned. But Lady Mary had this kind of pseudo romance with the director of the movie, and I like the storyline. And this is the one part of the movie that is the bridge between the villa aspect, the Lady Grantham aspect, and the rest of the film, with the film being shot at Downton Abbey. This is the one connection because basically Lady Mary has the same adventures that Lady Grantham had, in that she's married and a young attractive man is hitting on her and all of that, and then nothing ends up happening with it despite the fact that the man wants to take it further. So this is the one connection, and of course, they've been saying repeatedly that Lady Mary is going to become Lady Grantham, so that was good to see. I will say, though, we've had to have 2 movies now where Henry, Lady Mary's husband, has been written out, albeit artfully, but it does kind of leave me wanting, in that I want to see a progression of that storyline. Whereas I don't feel that Lady Mary had a significant kind of change through this storyline as a result of that. So that's the thing. Like, if this was on television still, I would say that storyline was interesting, but it didn't change her story arc or anything in any significant way. And we don't know what her status is with her husband. Maybe it would have been more interesting if her husband was in the movie and they were having arguments and their relationship was a bit on the rocks. Maybe then it would have been interesting to have this kind of storyline. But yeah, so I don't hate it, but I just wanted to point out that it is a bit repetitive as well. I like having Tom and Lucy in the movie. I really like the idea that the villa is being gifted to Sibby because Lady Grantham knows that Tom and Lucy aren't going to be as wealthy, even though I believe Lucy has some money coming in, right, with her lineage. But anyways, she wanted to do something nice so that Sibby's on the same status. I really like that. I will say that Tom and Lucy didn't really have much to do in the movie other than just be there. Last film, we had a lot of really key moments with Tom, and we really got to see it. Really encapsulated how much he's changed. And there's a lot of really great stuff with him in the previous film. In this one, he's just kind of there, So, as somebody who's a big fan of that character, I was maybe a bit disappointed. Another thing with Mr. Carson, it feels a bit repetitive to bring him back as a butler yet again, because we had him lose his job as a butler in the original series because his hand started shaking. and then he gains his job again when the king is coming into town because they're concerned about getting things right. Okay, and that makes sense. But then in this movie, he's brought back yet again because the old one is leaving. It just feels a bit repetitive, and also they don't acknowledge if his hands are still shaking. Like he pours glasses of wine for people at dinner. It just felt like something that I wanted to see addressed because for continuity, you know, because I'm thinking like, are his hands still shaking? Wouldn't that have gotten worse in the past few years? So I don't know. That was one thing. I loved his part of it. He had some of the best lines in this movie. Mr. Carson is one of the funniest parts. So the parts with the movie being shot were really fun and dealing with the talkies and stuff. And they have this comedy character, the sound recorder. I like all that stuff. I'm not sure that they did on-set sound effects while it was being filmed back then, but if they did, that would be interesting. I would be curious to know about that actually, but that was just good fun. But like I said, I don't know that storyline is that storyline lives up to the royalty storyline we had in the previous film. So there's one subplot in this film that I really think didn't land. And I think that subplot is Cora. She has a subplot where she has some kind of health issue. And I don't know if I missed something. Maybe it was a brief line of dialogue. I didn't know that she had this secret to reveal. And then halfway through the film, one of her daughters says, you have to tell father your secret now. And I was like, what was that connecting to? And then she reveals that she has this health issue. And it made the emotional release moment where we find out that she's ill. It made me feel like I was just missing something. So maybe I did miss something, and definitely let me know in the comment section down below. And then it kind of just ends up, you know, oh, she's sick, but it can be treated. So again, that's kind of another storyline that didn't really, it was just like kind of a red herring, didn't really lead to any real drama, at least for me. I did like, you know, Cora was saying stuff about how she doesn't regret anything and she's lived a good life and like that kind of stuff. That all plays off well. But yeah, I wasn't sure about that part of the storyline. So the big moments, the fan service moments that I talked about earlier that I alluded to, of course, is Mrs. Padmore and Mr. Mason getting together. And that was something that was teased in the show and the previous film. So it's, of course, an inevitability, but it did feel a little bit kind of tacked on to this movie. There's kind of one point where they're being extras in the scene where it felt like it really fit. But other than that, it kind of felt like maybe a little rushed, maybe a little forced. Maybe it's kind of like, why now? Yeah, what was Daisy waiting for to have this plot line start? It feels like something that would have been in the works for a while. And the other fan service relationship moment is, of course, Mr. Molesley and Miss Baxter ending up together. And honestly, that was like one of my favorite parts. There's a fun proposal that is, of course, being recorded and everybody hears it. So that was one of the best moments of the film. Mr. Molesley continues to be one of the best characters on the show, especially in the last film. He had a very standout moment. This film is no different. They integrate him into the plot in a very smart way. They make him the screenwriter for this talkie film. I thought that was absolutely brilliant. And I love that is the catalyst for what leads him to propose marriage to Miss Baxter. So I thought that storyline was the one subplot that was extremely well integrated. So no criticism there. And it was a happy thing to see. And of course, those are the fan service moments. Those two moments and Lady Grantham's death, even though it's a sad thing, I'd still say it's a fan service thing. Those are the three things that you see this movie for. Those are the three things that make this movie satisfying. It is also the three things that I think are going to make it difficult if they want to make another film, because they satisfied us with pretty much everything. So the next film would have to be some major shifts in how Downton Abbey does things. I don't think you can get by with kind of another movie where things are kind of wrapped up neatly by the end and it's kind of a back to normal kind of thing by the end, which is kind of how I feel about this film. One thing I forgot to mention was Mr. Barrow's storyline, which involved yet another love interest, which they just did in the previous film. And honestly, I thought it was done better in the previous film, where we got to see a bit more of it and we had a bit more time of the film dedicated to it. That was a storyline that kind of wasn't interwoven in the last movie. That was maybe the one storyline that wasn't integrated. It still felt like a more complete storyline than this one, which wasn't bad or anything. It just didn't have that same build up and didn't feel as earned. It's also just a tad repetitive. So that's my review for Downton Abbey: A New Era. I thought it was an enjoyable film for fans, but maybe didn't reach the same highs as the previous film. Let me know what you guys think in the comment section down below. And yes, I did forget to record an outro for this, so that's what we're doing now. Definitely hit the like if you want to see more reviews like this, and definitely comment down below with your thoughts and opinions on Downton Abbey 2, and I hope to see you guys in the next video. Thanks for watching, everybody. Peace out.